Please grab your seats so we can start. Welcome, everyone. Take a look around if you weren't here yesterday. Beautiful hall. And please grab your seats so that we can start. Good morning. Okay, we're going to start. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm sure you will find this early keynote well worth it, because our speaker today is an expert in expert human performance in sports. But what is special about her work is that she takes a 360-degree perspective of the athlete and their performance potential and achievements. She is well positioned for this, given her background in biology, medicine, sports science, and sports psychology. Karen Zentgraff is currently a professor of movement and exercise sciences at Goethe University, Frankfurt. Before, she studied in Indiana, Tübingen, and Gießen, and she worked at Gießen, Bern, and Münster universities. It is therefore not a surprise that Karen has amassed 90 co-authors over the course of her career so far. Among other roles, she leads Neuromotor Performance Laboratory and is a member of Competitive Sports Commission of the German Ministry of the Interior. And I guess German sports may have a soft spot for this academic because she was a national level competitive volleyball player. Oh, no, sorry, that was a mistake. She still is a national level competitive volleyball player. My dear colleagues, today's talk is about creating a better understanding of the elite player's mind-body for optimal health and performance. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Karen Zentgraff.
Thank you so much, Rita. Come here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me, FEPSAC, and thank you for allowing me to give a lecture on my research in this amazing location. I think I haven't had the time to be impressed. It takes some time. Wonderful, wonderful city, wonderful people. So thank you very much. Well, thank you also for giving me the opportunity for sharing my research with elite athletes in the last years that I've been doing, and I'm still in the middle of doing. This has mostly been financed by the Federal Institute of Sports Science in Germany. So to get into, in most cases, top athletes are backed up by a team of experts tasked with keeping the elite athlete physically and mentally healthy, and based on this, with driving them to new heights of performance. My research emerges from being a member of such teams in different team sports settings to provide scientific input to achieve high performance. I will therefore mostly focus on team sport athletes, this is players. Please note that I'm not a sports psychologist per se, but I think I do research that incorporates psychological approaches and that is also relevant for sports psychologists working with elite athletes to have a systemic view on them, as I hope to convey with the title of this talk. So I do research from a expertise research point of view, and this has been around psychology for many, many decades by now. One very influential variable in expertise is deliberate practice, which Erickson defined as a highly structured activity, the explicit goal of which is to improve performance, and it requires effort and is not inherently enjoyable. In this figure, you see the estimated accumulated hours of musical practice plotted against musicians' age. It suggests that individuals that ended up as the best in their domain as professionals accumulated more practice hours over their lifespan than good or amateur violinists did. And in short, this suggested, you will all know this, the 10,000-hour rule. Erickson and Lehmann have offered a revised version of the definition of deliberate practice that is a bit more encompassing, recognizing that not all hours of practice or training are equal. In 1999, they then stated that deliberate practice involves trying to exceed one's previous limits, which requires full concentration and effort. Consequently, it is only possible to engage in these activities for a limited amount of time until rest and recuperation are needed. This last sentence is particularly relevant for sports science. So in addition to deliberate practice, what else contributes to the development of expertise? Perhaps you came along the Dan plant, a young man from the wood industry who tried to achieve those 10,000 hours of practice to become a golf professional after quitting his job. So Dan started in 2010 and documented his hours and his performance. But around 5 years after starting, he blogged, "I kind of hurt my back a little yesterday," which ended up in stopping his route to excellence. So probably Dan's body was not so well prepared to withstand 10,000 hours of golf-related practice. So who do we talk about when studying experts in sports? Although it may seem obvious, in expertise research, sometimes physically active adolescents playing soccer in their leisure time have been termed experts. McAuley and colleagues published a current paper of exactly defining this status, which addresses the sport specifics concerning individual and team sports, professionalism and its characterisms, current and past training time, as well as youth athletes. They stated that there is unlikely to be external consensus on a new and all-encompassing definition, but as a result, they called for greater transparency when describing the population you actually study. And this should facilitate research synthesis and also practical interpretation. So I totally agree with the authors, and probably some of them are even here in the audience. I try to implement this the best I can, and I also do like the methodological framework put forward by Swan and colleagues for defining elite athlete that is specific for expertise research in sports. The score is related to standard of performance with 4 scoring categories: success, experience at highest level, but also to competitiveness of the sport, and differentiates between within sports and between sports comparisons. Based on the score, it leads to a classification you can see on the right, such as semi-competitive, successful, and world-class elite. It could also guide us as to what we should exactly report when we do studies with experts. It is pretty conservative, but making a clear distinction between a talented volleyball adolescent playing in the youth national team and a volleyball player in her 30s who has collected Olympic medals with her national team, although they both currently probably have the same amount of weekly practice hours. So in general, which aspects do, next to deliberate practice, need to be taken into account when it comes to accuracy of talent predictions? That means which factors need to be considered when developing experts. Baker and colleagues understandably integrated training and experience-related factors, but they extended the model. Other contributions come from physical, psychological, cognitive perceptual, as well as the motor domain. And based on the specific sport the athlete is involved in, these factors are differentially malleable and important. And consider that only some of these features are highly malleable. And in a systemic view, athletes develop and train, this is the blue circle, in certain environments built up by coaches, training groups, family, as well practice infrastructure. In 2016, Ulen and colleagues published a conceptual paper arguing for rethinking expertise. Their multifactorial gene-environment interaction model is mainly shaped by studies in musicians. What does it say? It indicates that expertise can be influenced directly, and this is important, by a number of other variables than deliberate practice. For example, hand morphology in musicians influences dexterity in pianists. A small hand makes it difficult to play wide chords and increases the risk of overuse disorders. Deliberate practice, as defined by Erickson, requires sustained attention and metacognition, both of which are correlated with intelligence. So, obviously, the model stresses the interaction between these domains, such as that anthropometrics are mostly heritable, or how people decide for specific environments, or how deliberate practice affects neural mechanisms relevant for developing expertise. In the long run, I would like to specify the model for experts in sports. And herein, I argue that at least partially individualized deliberate practice in sports with a match between athletes' features, such as their genetic profile, physical properties, cognitive functioning, etc., will explain some variance in eliteness of athletes. This conceptual idea is the reason why in one of the most encompassing projects in elite sports in Germany called Improve, together with Marcus, Carsten Krüger, Michael Mutz, and Lena Wiese, we assess all these domains and bring the data together from these very different domains and study their interaction in explaining expertise as well as their responsiveness to practice. In the following, I will show you some of the studies I've been doing in the last years and is still doing related to these different domains of the model, aiming at explaining some variance in expertise. I will start off with the physical properties section, which is a study on 3x3 basketball. So for those of you who haven't seen 3x3 so far, it is played on one basket, 3 players per team, and offense time is only 12 seconds. After one team scored a basket, the ball must only be directly passed outside the two-point line, but not brought behind the baseline, so it's even quicker. And it has been on the Olympic program for the first time in Tokyo last year. So what did we do? We used a local positioning system and specifically equipped sensors worn by the athletes on their backs to measure distance covered, jumps, change of directions, etc. And to study the changes between the two forms of basketball, so the classical and the new variant, we measured national and international games in female and male 3x3 and 5 versus 5. To bring it into a useful and comparable format, we report data per effective game minute, keeping in mind that a 3x3 game is over after around 15 minutes, whereas complete game duration in 5 versus 5 is around 90 minutes. So what did we find? Per minute in green, you see that there are more explosive actions, more jumps, and more change of directions, as well as a cumulative metric of these, the so-called player load, in male 3x3 basketball than in the classical form. The distance covered is comparable in both, although the court in 5 versus 5 is more than double size. The pattern of results is roughly the same in female athletes, but distance covered is a bit higher there. Player load and CODs are comparable. Importantly, we have data from each individual player, and what I show here are just the means from all the games we have measured. So what do we do with that information? For coaches and athletes, we recommend what is being the most important part of practice. So here, obviously, explosivities with the usage of power methods in the weight room would be focusing the goal. We need to take into account that there are more change of directions, so we focus on technique and weight training based on change of directions. Coaches should also acknowledge that practice could be shorter, but more intense in competition times. We also recommend micro-block practice because that resembles the tournament character of 3x3. That means players may have 4 games a day in 3x3 because it's in a tournament mode. But also we question the well-liked longer linear shuttle runs that basketball coaches like to do. And of course, which is important, we check performance of the individual athlete in performance-relevant domains, and then we can kind of come up with a delta or with a comparison on that. But how do we implement this individual approach into practice? And this is a model that has been around for quite a while by Andreas Hohmann. Well, the idea would be that we test athletes individually on in-performance health and competition aspects, and that we then, based on reference values we have from the competition of elite athletes, as a so-called target comparison comparison, and then, of course, we need to prioritize what we can actually address in the next weeks of practice. Importantly, we do this in the whole team. So this is not only the scientists, but this is the athlete as well as the coach come together and have a consensus on that. Then, of course, we do the intervention, which is impacted upon based on individual monitoring. And in the end, we finally need an individual evaluation by repeated diagnostics. So I'll show you here what kind of individual diagnostics we do in relation to change of directions in different sports games. So this is how we test basketball or volleyball players on COD, on change of direction. And here you see one of the best German 3x3 players in this test. And in ice hockey, this is basically the same, but in an ice hockey specific format, which looks like this. And by the way, this is the dual task variant. Keep that in mind for later. But we also do individual diagnostics for game sport athletes in game-relevant strength measures. So when players experience collisions or falls in their game and have impact on their head, such in heading, we also test for neck strength. A strong neck might buffer the potentially brain-damaging effects of impact. This will be the next study I present. We specifically looked at headers in soccer in male and female youth players aged between 16 and 17 years of age and had two objectives. The first one was to analyze the association between strength variables and kinematics. And the second one was to study whether this is changeable via a neck and core strength training. So we measured players' kinematics in heading when balls arrived at different velocities. So in female athletes, we only measured heading balls arriving at a speed of 34 kilometers per hour. In males, additionally, with 38 kilometers per hour. This was due to the restriction given by the Ethics Commission. We also measured different strength parameters, as well as cervical range of motions in all planes. Here, you see the acceleration of head and core plotted against female and male ball velocities. As expected, total acceleration of head and core in heading is higher when the ball is approaching with a higher velocity, as for the male players. In addition, we found acceleration values over 15 g in, as you could see in the video, anticipating heading, when female youth players were heading as well as in male players with high ball velocities. Here you see the numbers of all strength assessments in male and female players, as well as the cervical range of motion. To make a long story short, male athletes have higher values in all strength measures, but there were no differences in cervical range of motion. So is acceleration in heading related to strength measures? The answer is yes. Based on the regression model, when flexion strength explains 29% of variance in acceleration, an increase of 10 Newton should lead to a reduction in acceleration by 0.55 g in low ball velocities. In high ball velocities, this would even lead to a reduction of 0.71 g. So to test this, we did an intervention study with that focused on neck and core muscles. It took 12 weeks. They did it twice a week for 10 to 15 minutes. We implemented a progressive load during the 12 weeks. We had 14 athletes in the intervention group and 14 in the control group, which means that they just continued their normal practice. Age was 16.5, and the regional, there were regional youth players, so the score put forward by Swan would be around only 1. So is flexion strength increased after the intervention? Yes, in the intervention group, as you can see here. Overall, the increase is about 27 Newton, which means 23% change of flexion strength after the intervention. Please also note that 2 subjects did not show any improvements after the intervention. So there's as you can see on the right, a high variance among players. Is acceleration of the head and the core changed after the intervention? That would be sort of the functional measurement on that. Answer again is yes. After the intervention, acceleration is about 1.7 g lower during heading than before the intervention. So we conclude that there's an inverse association between upper body acceleration after anticipated headers and strength of cervical and core muscles, which could be a strategy to protect the athlete's brain. It's a 12-week intervention, obviously, is feasible and effective. You saw the increases around 20%, but high variance between players. Plus, and this is important, we saw higher didn't show the data and specific, but we saw higher intervention effects in the female athletes. My last study in the domain physical property relates to horizontal strength. Why is it important in players? Well, upper body performance is essential when you need to manipulate a ball or block a ball or tackle an opponent. When you look at different sports, it happens in different positions and body shifts, mostly as a whole body movement that involves multiple segments working in a kinetic chain. So our aims were to understand the role of horizontal strength and to further individualize and tailor practice. We measured over 100 players from different team sports, having the full range of eliteness right there, see at the bottom, at the left. We also had an Olympic champion in there, by the way. We use a self-built strength machine with a force transducer in the rope. Athletes were pushing against on shoulder level. So we used 3 different positions: upright, bit lean forward, very much lean forward, such as you can see up here. We also measured this in shifted positions. That means normally players don't stand always symmetrically, but they have shifted their body weight to one position, and we controlled this via a force plate. We used relative strength per position as the dependent variable, and we of course checked for plausibility, validity, and we wanted to come up with reference values in the long run. So here you see the data in the upright position. The middle bar is the one with the 50-50, with the symmetrical position and with the left and right position. So it comes around 3 Newton per kilogram. Then when you lean a bit forward, we almost reach 5 Newton per kilogram. And when you really lean mostly forward, you reach around 6 Newton per kilogram. So we have come up with different reference values for gender, age, and sports, which look like this. Importantly, we checked what are the findings for high eliteness levels. And here, if you sort of divide the groups, We compared relative strength values from competitive plus and semi-elites and found that elite athletes scored higher in every section. And this is not about body weight, because this is obviously relative strength. And we also saw that elite athletes can reliably generate high horizontal strength values also in shifted positions. And preliminary data suggests that world-class athletes are more symmetrical to both sides, so they don't have a weakness on one side. It's pretty much symmetrical. And this measure is, by the way, highly sensitive to injuries that diminish loading capacity on one side, for example, after a sprained ankle or a knee tendinitis, etc. We also use this on an individual level to monitor return to play after unilateral injury. So, obviously, higher expertise athletes score higher in reactive horizontal strength values, which is extremely important in game sports. And reference values were around 3 to 9 Newton per kilogram. And of course, we again used this for individualizing practice. Coming to the next aspect of the Ullén model, considering the factor genes, I will show some findings on sport-related gene or genetic variants. Before we use genetic profiling to optimize and individualize training, as for example Bruna and colleagues have suggested, we need to know whether and which genetic variants really play a role in elite sports. So we analyzed whether some genetic variants are related to sports performance in different sports and disciplines. If that was the case, we expect that distribution of this genetic variance should be biased. The answer, again, is yes, we found different polymorphisms in red that were overrepresented in certain competitive athletes. Specific ones were more prevalent in endurance or in strength athletes. The suggested physiological mechanisms are diverse. The effect of genes in endurance athlete is, for example, on enzymes in energy metabolism, such as glucose uptake in the muscles or storage of fuel in the muscle. Considering strength, some genetic variants act on proteins existing only in fast-twitch fibers that participate in muscle contraction. Susceptibility to injuries might be related to proteins within ligaments and tendons impacting on robustness and healing of these bodily elements. The studies we do on menstrual cycle in athletes I also categorized to genes because familial resemblance for menstrual and premenstrual symptoms, as well as time point of menarche or menopause, is due mostly to genetic factors with heritability estimates of around 40%. So one aspect of the female cycle with its fluctuant hormone levels relevant for athletes might be the finding that it impacts on muscle damage. In this meta-analysis, the authors aimed at elucidating which phase of the cycle might be most prone to triggering a muscle damage response after strenuous bout of exercise. So one marker of muscle damage, delayed onset muscle soreness, DOMS, seems to be particularly vulnerable to the early follicular phase. The mean follicular phase length is about 16 to 17 days, beginning at the first day of menstruation and ending at ovulation. The early follicular phase is around day 1 to 8, mostly the time during menstruation when progesterone and estrogen are at the lowest level, suggesting that in this time training loads could be lowered and regeneration could be taking a bit longer. Another relevant aspect is the suggestion that menstrual cycle phase is related to the rate of anterior cruciate ligament rupture, ACL. The associations of the cycle with ACL laxity and ACL injury remain controversial, and I know this, and the methodological quality and conceptual comparability of the study still needs to be increased. Nevertheless, with regard to the ACL tear rate, the lowest risk of tear was in the luteal phase compared to the combined follicular and ovulatory phases. In yellow, you see the studies that suggest that in the luteal phase, there is a lower risk of tear. So what kind of symptoms do women experience over their menstrual cycle? Brunfels and colleagues introduced the MSI, the Menstrual Symptom Index, to characterize the most common symptoms, but also their frequency in exercising women. A score of 54 would mean that this woman has 18 symptoms, all occurring with high frequency. 0 would mean none at all. The most prevalent symptoms reported by 90% of the women are mood changes, then tiredness and fatigue, stomach cramps, and breast pain. It should be noted that the higher the MSI, the more probable women missed practice or competition. The mean MSI of these almost 7,000 women was around 23, with a bell-shaped distribution, as you can see at the bottom to your left. As these 7,000 were exercising but not elite players, mostly practicing twice a day, we checked this in 32 competitive to world-class elite players. Consistently with Brunfels, our athletes reported mostly stomach cramps, but interestingly, also disturbed sleep, and around 2/3 reported fatigue and heavy legs. When we checked for the phase these symptoms occur, you can see that they are not evenly distributed, but rather depend on the cycle phase. In blue, you see the reported items during the menstrual phase. In orange, those in the late follicular phase, and in gray, those in the luteal phase. Most symptoms are reported during menstruation, the least number of symptoms in the late follicular phase. The luteal phase, encompassing the time of the premenstrual days, is characterized by a high variance in between phase, where many report that means, for example, tender breasts. The MSI mean with 13 was a bit lower than in the previous population, but the range again was large from 1 to 34. So what do we think about monitoring individual menstrual cycle phase and symptoms? Well, we think that this is important to tailor practice because it might help to reduce DOMS, it might help to reduce risk of injury, and it might also make females, athletes, feel better, more respected, and even seen, which may result in having female athletes longer in elite sports than we do have at the moment. It has also been suggested that it could foster some specific adaptations, such as muscle strength. And there's just a new study out by Kiso and al., and this study indicates that resistance training conducted in the follicular phase, the so-called follicular-based resistance training, may be superior to luteal phase training in terms of enhancing two dimensions of strength, maximal strength and mass, so hypertrophy. And I always suggest that this can be used as some sort of health indicator specifically when we see that in endurance athletes we have a higher prevalence of RED or LEA, so efficiency, energy deficiency in sports. So knowing the cycle phase and individual symptoms of the elite female is, in my eyes, essential for optimizing performance. Now I will present studies related to cognitive functioning and motor inhibition in experts, and I kind of put these two together. So what is motor inhibition? Motor inhibition is about stopping a planned and initiated action quickly and successfully. Here is an example from basketball. So player A initiates a pass to player B. Situation changes because an opponent slides into the passway. Player A has to stop the action and decide for another option. Colleagues have found that athletes in interactive sports show shorter stopping times when compared to static athletes. And when you study game sport athletes only, we also do find an average of expert players, mainly for handballers on the manual response side. So is there a relationship between expertise scores and motor inhibition in players? We hypothesized that the higher the expertise score, the shorter the SSRT. And we used the SSRT, the stop signal reaction time paradigm put forward by Verbruggen and Logan, where athletes have to respond to a go trial, either on the left or the right side. And in around 25% of the trials, the arrow turns blue, and this is the stop sign, so you don't have to press the button. And based on the racehorse model, you assess and calculate the SSRT. So here's the data. Higher expertise scores delineates higher expertise, as you can see in the regression model here. Mainly driven by the manual actions, again, not by the foot actions so much. And of course, this is just a relation. We do not know what impacts on what. So expertise impacts on SSRT or SSRT on expertise. But recent studies suggest that SSRT can be shortened via specific interventions. So when you look at the very recent meta-analysis published by Logan and colleagues, they had 48 studies involved in this analysis, and across these 41 studies with a range of cognitive tasks, the effect of elite status had a significant medium facilitating effect on cognitive function measures compared to non-athlete controls. The meta-analytic estimate of this effect was G.57. Type of cognitive domain, attention allocation, inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility, was a significant moderator, such that studies assessing attentional allocation, cognitive flexibility facilitated differences on cognitive function. However, inhibitory control did not. This was a bit surprising to me at first, but when I had a closer look, the paradigms they were using are mostly cognitive inhibition paradigms, and we don't assume the same mechanism at play here. So note that the experience of the athlete was also a significant moderator in this analysis, such that elite athletes facilitated these differences, but college and amateur players did not. Our studies integrated in the analysis published by Holger Heppe incorporated in here, categorized as cognitive flexibility here, showed an average effect size of of 0.5, pretty close to the overall effect. So when, as suggested by motor inhibition studies in elite players, perceptual cognitive motor speed for elite player is essential, we should check for cognitive motor interference, where the motor speed is reduced when players have to process dynamic environments and make decisions for action. I brought a short video clip to illustrate this. So here you can see a rapid gameplay where the player sprints towards the goal while handling the stick and the puck, scanning the opposite players, jumping over the goalie's stick, and finishing with this amazing shot. So even though this is a highlight scene, concurrent cognitive and motor demands are very common in sports games. So therefore, my very last part will be on assessing complex task costs in motor speed tasks and how we could help players to reduce these costs. So in a recent review, it was corroborated that also athletes show decreased performance under cognitive motor dual task conditions. There have been some studies with athletes in this context, however, mostly without sport-specific actions. We aimed at identifying athletes with high costs and try to elucidate whether this is an overwhelming construct or whether these are specific skills. So what did we do? We measured basically all the German national squad players, ranging from semi-elite to successful elite, and they were all measured in 4 paradigms. This is a sport-unspecific paradigm where they had to tap as quick as possible in the single task condition, and in a dual task condition or the complex task condition, they had to concurrently read aloud the figures on the blue spots. We also did sport-specific tests. So this is a sprint test on ice, by the way. And in the complex test, like in the single task, LEDs lit on both sides of the track in different colors. Players had to discriminate those, memorize, and recall after finishing. Then we had the change of direction test that you just saw at the beginning of the lecture, and we used the lateral shuttle test, where athletes had to monitor the LEDs, and when the LED lights up, then he or she has to score a goal. And we do this as a concurrent task and as a single task. So here we see the numbers for the single task costs and relative costs for all paradigms. So it's single task performance costs and relative costs. And in all paradigms, the addition of a cognitive task results in a decrease of performance, mostly in speed-related performance, which is important for sports game. Frequency in tapping shows the greatest relative cost with around 15%, whereas sprinting has the smallest with around 4%. Notably, there was high variance among athletes again. Side note, those athletes showing high costs in one task were mostly not the ones showing high costs in other tasks. And this rather speaks to a skill approach rather than an encompassing dual task ability approach. So when we have identified athletes with high costs, mostly with high sport-specific costs, such in the COD or the ladder shutter test, we offer 2 intervention strategies that we try to compare with respect to cost reduction. And one is virtual reality training. Here's the goalie version, by the way. I've seen that some here at FEPSAC will present some VR studies too. Here we can, we can see what the player sees. We also do have, of course, a version for the field players, such as passing and shooting and so on. And we also have a cognitive motor interference training, where players need to do quick actions and concurrently go for for a cognitive task. And we also do it sport-specific with handling the puck and the stick, etc. So, wrapping up, all these studies suggest that there might be other relevant factors besides deliberate practice, or that imply that individualized deliberate practice, as denoted in the multifactorial gene-environment model of expert performance by Ullén and colleagues. This suggests that having individual data of relevant features allows for tailoring practice to the athlete needs, as well as the demands of the sport specific characteristics. For sports, I would adapt the model as seen here and suggest that we need to study sport-specific expertise. Sport games and players could be one category in a first step. In the future, the way to use this model is to better understand sport expertise via analyzing the specific contributions of each factor, as well as the specific interactions. One topic that might come up stronger in the future is the optimization of practice based on individual genetic profiles. Also for psychology, it will become relevant to study how cognitive function and intervention impact on the specific neural mechanisms relevant for high performance in elite sports. I would also like to stress that physical and mental health aspects and performance aspects should both play a major role in tailoring practice, as in the end, that helps to accumulate more individualized deliberate practice. I hope I could contribute to the spread of this multifactorial model with a small step. Many will follow. To make this impact on the field, I would like to cordially thank my team, who are also members of teams, sports teams in different contexts, and who also give a lot to this on a personal basis for my team as well as for the athletes. This is Marie, Lukas, Björn, Carsten, Christina, Dennis, and Mark. And I would also like to thank Holger, who is no longer with us. We will also always keep him in good memory. I would also like to thank my senior volleyball mates at the bottom to the right, who show me each year that physical properties might decrease with age, but competitiveness is a lasting mindset. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Karen. That was wonderful. Okay, so we're happy to have some questions from the audience.
There's a question.
Yes, over there.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering, you're talking about elite athletes here, but which of these trainings would you recommend for younger athletes, and which of these would you not recommend? Like, you think for some it might be too early to get into certain kinds of improvements, whether that's cognitive motor or like something like with soccer, like you talked about, and which of these, could benefit like even younger athletes from like 10, 11 years old?
Do you know the younger athletes, or asking for younger athletes? Sorry, it's hard to understand. Sorry about this. So you were asking about how this refers to younger athletes? Yeah, wonderful. Very good question. I've been thinking about this a lot, because in most expertise studies, we do not really acknowledge that there's a difference between developing expertise and experts per se. So what we try to come up with is that we have, for specific sports games, specific ages that we start to test. And we only do this in players who who practice on a professional level. And then we have reference values for these domains. And we have totally different ones for, my example was the 30-year-old who's on the Olympic national team and so on. And these are very different, because in the one area you would try to progress, right? And you would like to bring the athletes to some levels that are sort of the precondition to become an expert. Whereas we have a lot of athletes in their 30s who only have one goal: to make it to Paris. And they don't want to progress. They just want to basically keep healthy and stay in competition. And this means that we have a highly individualized tailoring of practice to these specific contexts. Very good question.
Have we got another question? Can see.
Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Thanks for your talk. We were wondering, so you guys are doing a lot of studies on team sports. And basically, if I were a coach, my takeaway would be that I need to individualize practice, have every athlete train their skills individually. And we're wondering if there's a trade-off, because I'm losing team time. I'm losing time to coordinate. Any sort of development of an expert team compared to a team of experts. So I don't know if you guys have anything on the trade-off of those two aspects.
Mm-hmm. Also, very, very good question. Thanks. So the question basically relates to, well, how much practice can be individualized in expert teams, right? Because normally, the coaches, they don't have that in mind. Everyone does the ball practice, and there's the weights and blah, blah, blah. So what we try to do is we try to first test really efficiently. So what would be the best is if we could do that in the gym. So no lab times, no blah, 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 all this organization with dates and so on. So we do that in the gym, at their practice. We do that without preparation, because sometimes athletes ask, so shouldn't we not work out for 3 days so we are relaxed? And we say no, it's totally coming out of practice. Plus, we have negotiated for a time in practice where each athlete on the team has its own individual time. And in our experience is that when coaches understand that this is fruitful in the end for team success, when each player gets a bit better on their individual basis, that helps the whole team. So we try to make it clear what would be the individual part for each athlete and put that into the whole sort of team setting. And this is kind of a mindset in the long run that players do their individual stuff just to become a better athlete. So that would be kind of my compromise for that. And I truly understand that, of course, in team sports, team practice and time is essential. And it shouldn't be substituted or anything. It just should be amended by partially individual time slots that we have in team sports.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you, Karen, very much for your talk this morning. We have something to give you, which is coming. I'm going to ask everybody after this to walk outside to the stairs so that we can take the conference official photo of the group right after this keynote talk. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Rita. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll see everybody on the stairs in 3 minutes, please. Thank
3
you very
minutes,
much.
okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks so much.